Hello, my name's Amanda Berg-Whittle. I am going to be talking to you about beta thalassemia today. As you can see, there is a meme on this slide. However, there weren't enough good memes, so that's the only one I'm including. Normally I include more, but that's okay, whatever. Alright. Beta thalassemia is an autosomal recessive disorder. It causes a decreased or absent production of beta globulin protein and hemoglobin. So as you can see, this hemoglobin molecule has 4 different proteins. There's 2 alpha chains, 2 beta chains, and then each of them has a heme group where the iron is stored. And so there's alpha thalassemia and beta thalassemia, each of which would cause a decrease in its specific protein. And then this is also related to sickle cell anemia, which also causes misshapen hemoglobin. So some of the symptoms include malformed red blood cells, as you can see on this picture right here, because the protein's not shaped correctly, so therefore it doesn't have the correct shape of the cell. And then it can also cause, beta thalassemia can cause an increase in alpha globulin formation, and so that would cause too much alpha globulin to be formed. And another thing that it could cause would be iron overload, so you get too much iron in your body. That would cause like heavy metal toxicity. And then skeletal deformities, because your bone marrow is creating red blood cells, but it's not creating correctly shaped red blood cells, so that will mess up your shapes of your bones. And then just overall unwellness and decreased oxygen perfusion. You won't be able to move oxygen through your body correctly because you don't have hemoglobin that's functional. Because when the shape is off, then the function's obviously going to be off as well. So there's 2 different types of beta thalassemia. The first one is the major type. So that's the really severe beta thalassemia. So that's caused when you have 2 affected parents having a child. That makes it so that both of the beta chains in the hemoglobin are affected. So you see that there's 4 different 4 different proteins in the hemoglobin, 2 alpha and 2 beta. Both of the beta chains will be affected, so that pretty much makes it so that you don't produce any beta globulin. It's also called Cooley's anemia, so this is the really severe life-threatening anemia that'll result in lifelong blood transfusions, lifelong IV medications to decrease oxygen or decrease iron in the body, because they get really bad heavy metal toxicity from the amount of iron in their bodies. In this picture you can see that sometimes the children with this really severe beta thalassemia will have deformities in their face, and you will be able to notice that based on their facial features. So the other type of beta thalassemia is the minor. So the minor is actually broken into 2 different types. There's the intermedia, which is the moderate to severe anemia. That's when one parent is affected, or there's one affected parent mates with a carrier, or 2 carriers. So then this only affects one beta chain rather than both beta chains. So this causes a decreased production of beta globulin, but not completely absent production like the other one. So this may require blood transfusions, it may not, it just depends on how severely affected this individual is. And then there's the minima, which is just like the trait. So sometimes these children are affected, but more often than not, they don't really require any medical treatment. So the geographic distribution is mostly in Europe and the Mediterranean. It started off in the Middle East and then moved with those populations into like Cyprus and Greece and Italy. And so as you can see, well, this picture is actually looking at different, pathologies of the blood. So sickle cell is mostly in Africa, which makes a lot of sense because it allows for resistance to malaria, whereas the thalassemia is a little bit higher up. There's not as much malaria, and it doesn't really have any effect on malaria, so that's why that's mostly in that area instead. So it's pretty prevalent in Mediterranean populations, up to 1 in 10,000 in Europe alone, but even higher in Mediterranean countries. So it is caused by a single base deletion, which causes a frameshift mutation in the hemoglobin subunit beta gene. So this can cause, well, the frameshift mutation makes it so that all of the base pairs, or all of the codons after that are changed. And so you're putting in the wrong amino acids, and so the protein just isn't formed correctly. And then in some versions, there's over 200 different varieties of this this mutation. But in some of them, that deletion can also cause a nonsense mutation, which is when there's a premature stop codon, so that it doesn't even finish producing the protein at all. So in this picture, this is not the exact mutation, it's just an example of what this mutation looks like. So in the top one, this is normal. So you have these bases, and then you have the protein, the protein chain being created. But then you take out this uracil, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10th in. So then this amino acid becomes a leucine instead. So that changes all of the codons after that, and then instead of continuing on, we end up with this stop codon right here. So that's the missense mutation right there. This is just a pedigree of what an autosomal recessive inheritance looks like. So we have 2 carrier parents that then produce some affected children and some carrier children. So the affected children are going to be homozygous recessive, whereas the carriers are going to be heterozygous dominant. But then if those carriers mate with affected people, then they will produce both carriers and affected people that are going to be homozygous dominant. And then, as you see all the way on the right, 2 affected people would produce all affected children, and those children more than likely are going to have very severe beta thalassemia. So there's multiple testing options. Normally, genetic testing is not performed because it's not really necessary. If the child starts to show symptoms of anemia, then the family practitioner or pediatrician will most likely order just a CBC, a complete blood count, and then also iron testing to make sure that it's not an iron deficiency causing the anemia, as well as a blood smear, so you can actually see the sizes and shapes of the affected cells, or if there are affected cells. And you can see in this picture we have some normal cells, and then we also have some affected cells, so that would most likely be an intermediate beta thalassemia that this person has. And then if there are 2 affected parents or 2 carrier parents, most OBGYNs would be willing to order chronic or chorionic villus sampling or amniocentesis just to check and see if the child is going to have the really severe type of anemia. But I was trying to find pricing for all of this, and it's very difficult because they all require a prescription in order to find out pricing for the specialized genetic testing. Again, it's very rarely performed and probably not really necessary. It's normally just found based on symptoms. And then for treatments, we have blood transfusions, just so that we can get some normal erythrocytes in there. There's also chelation therapy, which is a IV infusion of these different medications that I've listed here that would decrease iron levels as well as any other heavy metals. and that's because you get iron overload with beta thalassemia. And then there's bone marrow transplants in really severe cases so that people can produce at least some normal red blood cells, and then folic acid supplements. And there's my references. I hope you learned some fun stuff about beta thalassemia today.